Can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, all right. I'm not getting any feedback yet. I hear him small echo, but not too bad. All right. I think we may have it. Perfect. Cool. Let's go ahead and kick off. Sorry, guys, for that. We really want to get this to you. We've been trying for a week. We've done multiple test runs, and we thought we had it, and it slipped through my fingers. So I'll take that one, guys. That is absolutely my fault. But let's jump right in. We are 18 minutes behind. So let's go ahead and kick off. Welcome to the CISSP, diving into the domains live stream. My name is Joel Bork. I'm with Brandon Krieger, and we are excited to tell you guys exactly what we're doing here today. So we're going to be studying for the CISSP exam with you. We're going to do all the reading in the book with you. You can read it or you can participate on these. We're going to give you a lot of the meat and potatoes of what you would get in a book such as this, along with a number of other resources online, and we're going to go right into it. So, Brandon, I hope it's okay if we skip ahead a little bit, but will you do a quick introduction? Tell us why you're going for the CISSP and why we're here today.
Well, I think one of the great things about being, a CISSP, a CISSP, is because it's a managerial certification. A lot of times when you're sitting in the boardroom, you're talking to senior level executives, it's good to have this idea of the top-down approach when it comes to security, understanding the different domains, understanding the different areas of security, and really being able to have that discussion, because at the highest level, you're talking about, the protocols, the processes, the procedures, and really to know that inside out, especially being account executive, really helps to be that advisor, right? To be able to walk through each and every scenario with a client and the reason why behind it. So I think it's essential for us to be CISSP, especially in the cybersecurity industry, to have that base and have that knowledge.
Absolutely. That's excellent. Now, guys, I want to talk about a few of the resources we're going to be using. The first one is this one. It's CISSP Study Guide, 3rd edition by Eric Conrad. Not only have I met that guy in person and shook his hands, but he's got it on his iPad, but he's a fantastic resource, brilliant guy. We're also going to be using CISSP Certified Information System Security Professional Official Study Guide, and then CISSP 2nd edition video course on Safari books. So if you guys have Safari books at work, use that resource and jump in there. The last and final resource we're going to be using, which is going to be helping us, guys, is there's a free mobile app. It's called CISSP Prep. It's a little green shield. Download that. It's free, and it has multiple testing sections for each and every domain, so you can gauge when you're ready to take the CISSP. So on top of that resource, Brandon had a great idea where we're going to be bringing in a number of certified CISSP professionals or professionals working in the industry to put their knowledge into practice in their day-to-day lives. So we'll take those people, bring them on board with us, and they can deliver the knowledge to give you real-world examples so it sticks. So not only when exam times comes around, you'll be ready for it, but after that, you can actually put it into practice.
Well, the other thing is, let's add that in. A lot of these scenarios and questions from what I've been told by CISSPs that have taken the test, it's real-world thinking. Like, you can't just kind of brain dump it. You have to think of the scenario. Or you have to think of, if we were in this scenario of a data breach, how would that look? You look at confidentiality, you look at forensics, you're looking at all that. You have to think in that mindset as a manager, not as a technician. You're looking at, what's the cache, you're looking at the technology, you're looking at the solutions, you're looking at the tools used. But at a high level of managerial, you have to have that mindset. And having these scenarios, which we're going to go through different scenarios from each, area or domain, it's really going to help real world thinking. So when you do the exam, you can kind of go, that scenario they talked about, this is where it applies.
Absolutely. And I do have to throw a quick shout out to you guys as the audience members. Once again, thank you guys for being here. But also, if you know a fantastic individual who has their CISSP that you think would be great on this live stream and potentially has a really good microphone, send them our way. We would love to invite them to speak to one of these domains. So, Brandon, are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
Let's do it. Let's jump right in. All right. So first and foremost, we are going to be jumping into the first domain on security and risk management. And this is better known in the security world as the CIA triad. Over to you, Brandon.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we have to cover is that it's security and risk management domain, right? Something that when you look at the mindset of it, the business, is what's your risks, right? What's your risk as a company and an organization? To really think about those areas is what's your risk. And the first starting point as they think about is confidentiality, data integrity or integrity, and then availability. I know when I first got taught this kind of triad, they always talked about data integrity and then system integrity. So first, let's kind of talk about the C. Most people, this is going to be a review. This is going to be, a concept that most likely we talked about before that we even started. The CIA triad, most people think about it, but we weren't going to go into why. Why do you really need to know this? And the confidentiality is about prevention unauthorized disclosure of information or keeping the data that's supposed to be secret, right? So what does that really mean? I know a lot of us talk about data, but look how many times, data breaches. I know one of the ones we were bringing up is, what were we talking about? It was Ancestry.com, right? That's a real one we're going to talk about later as we go through, but that's data right there. We've got HIPAA data, we've got, financial data, you've got all different types of data, but you want to make sure it stayed secure, so it's confidential. And I had a conversation just recently with someone about like IoT devices, right? And a confidentiality, a lot of times is second nature. It's not availability is first, having accessible, being able to turn your lights, look at your fridge, over the network, but they don't think about confidentiality. So what do you think about confidentiality, Joe? I mean, you deal a lot of pen testing, you kind of deal that area. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why this is one of the cornerstones to the CIA triad, right? Large organizations, small organizations, it doesn't matter. You have to keep data confidential, right? And it's not just protecting your clients, right? It's their legalities, whether it's HIPAA or you have GDPR now, there are some massive fines and financial responsibilities attached to that as well if you don't keep your data confidential. So that's why it's a pillar, and that's why it's here.
Well, I know for here we have HIPAA, right? And there's HIPAA compliance. There's all these different compliances that you have to in governance. And if you get breached, there is fines. So confidentiality is very important for organizations to take into consideration when planning and road mapping their security plan, their security posture.
Yep. Now, there's a few key terms that you guys are going to have to know on this exam that are related to confidentiality. The first one is going to be sensitivity, and this is referring to the quality of information, right? So some of this could cause harm or damage if it's disclosed. A good example of this is really the security clearance levels. So something that is confidential is going to be much less sensitive than something that is rated top secret.
Well, let's talk about that. Who classifies data?
Mostly governments, right? And government officials. And there's whole departments in governments who are responsible for classifying this data. But also, I've even helped organizations who they have their own level of classifications within their organization. So, hey, this is classified for our organization. This is confidential. It can go into any department, but, keep it within the organization. So it really depends on what you're talking about. But it could be, your personal data, could be corporate data, could be governmental data. I think there's levels all the way across the board.
Right. And I think that's something that's why I wanted to bring that up is each individual, each company classifies their own data, right? If it's government, if it's organization, because you've got copyright, you got trademark, you've got maybe even research material, very sensitive HR material, all can be classified as sensitive, but that's the company that's making that call. So as you're going to be a vCISO or a CISO and working on these roles as senior, you have to understand that it might be up to you. Your job is to classify the data and classify, what's sensitive, what's not. And that could be a questionnaire, it could be some research. You could use some tools of that. So really kind of get your mindset around confidentiality and sensitivity. The next one you wanted to talk about is discretion, right? Mm-hmm. So discretion is the act of decisions where an operator can influence or control disclosure in order to minimize harm or damage. So have you ever ran into any discretion with data?
Yeah, I mean, this is really where, you could even take the person who's classifying the data, right? It may be at their discretion to say, is this confidential? Is it not? And if they have the wrong discretion on that decision, it could cause harm or damage, right? So that discretion is an act. And if it's an act, it needs to be audited, right? And we'll get into some of that later as well. And the next one is criticality. So, and we're going to rip through some of these terms really quick. I know we're a little behind, but we're going to work on catching up, but we still have to get you this information. So criticality is it mission critical? right? If it's a measure of criticality, the higher level of criticality, the more likely the need to maintain the confidentiality of the information. So high levels of criticality are essential. And you can even take this. So the sensitivity could directly apply to the criticality and vice versa.
Which is important. And the criticality could be, can it take down the company, right? Can it release information? So again, putting these in scenarios that you guys can think about the criticality. Is it sensitive information that now you're doing a launch, right, of a new product or new that, and it actually could destroy that launch, right, and take that right down that, now that information's leaked. So when you look at criticality, you got to look at identifying it. How can it affect the company? What's the risk, right? And then next we talk about concealment. Concealment is the act of hiding or preventing disclosure. Often concealment is viewed as a means of cover, obfuscation, or distraction. A related concept to concealment is security through obscurity, which is the concept of attempting to gain protection through hiding, silence, or secrecy. So that's very important to think about, is that sometimes when, corporate espionage, when people are trying to hide data, right, hide information, this is where you look at concealment, right? You look at these areas where people are trying to conceal data for transfer. They're trying to use, a lot of companies, you have USB sticks, they've blocked them so you can't plug them in, or they're trying to rename documents or anything along that line. So there is tools now that can scan documents as they're being transferred to make sure that they're not concealed and the data is not concealed into some other document, like a PDF, a Word document, Excel, and being, transferred out.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple others that kind of, tag onto that. I know our company uses honeypot networks, right? So it talks about cover obfuscation. Yes, encryption at rest. Yes, encryption in transit. But, we've taken concealment a level further, that if you actually get into our networks, you're going to have to dig around for a bit, and we may have you just spin in circles in a sandbox, right? So that's another level of concealment. Next one is secrecy, right? Or the act of keeping something secret. We're going to move on real quick. Privacy. Everybody knows what privacy is, right? Keeping that information confidential, especially if it's PII, it could cause harm. And I'm going to jump into this one, Brandon, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Seclusion, and this involves storing something out in an out-of-the-way location, right? So this is really where your company backups. Are they secluded? Are they isolated, right? So these next two terms are very similar, but we have to differentiate between them. So seclusion can help the enforcement of confidentiality protections, whereas in isolation is the act of keeping something separated for others, so it can prevent the commingling of information. And clarify, do you have any examples of that, Brandon? Anything to add to that?
Well, seclusion, we have to think about is one-way access, right? Mm-hmm. That you only have a certain people that can have access to it. It's an identified group. It's someone that has it. Isolation, like you said, it's completely separate, right? It's isolated out of the framework. It's isolated maybe off the network, whatever that may be. So, you just got to look at different examples that you as the company might want to do that in like an isolation, where maybe it's, your secure backups that no one really has access, and then you have to bring them back in to a secure area, then get access to it, right? So things like that, like could be financial records, could be trademark, copyright information, could be research information. I'm just using those as an example. But those information, you might want to isolate that so no one can get access to it.
Yep, absolutely. So once again, we're still on the confidentiality leg of the CIA triad. And now this is the leg of the stool that organizations who are having data breaches are absolutely failing at, right? So when you look at organizations who are leaking customer data, you're seeing credit card leaks, social security numbers, addresses, etc. We as consumers have entrusted these companies to keep this information confidential, and they're failing us. How is that for an example, Brandon?
That's perfect. Now, just kind of connect with the group right now. I know we got a few questions. Sean was saying, exciting. Do we have a syllabus? Yeah, we're actually running off the CISSP, kind of guide of what they have for each domain. He's got that for the study group. You can actually go to CISSP, the icsquared.org. You can go to that website and you can actually download it from there, and they'll actually tell you. We're going through each domain, each subsection. Next one is Paul, thanks, awesome information. Isolation CISSP, for example. So, good. Thanks, guys. That was Dr. Tony. Thanks, guys, for chiming in. What do you guys think, of confidentiality? So let us know. Put in the chat. We're really watching and keeping engaged. Yep. So next, let's talk about what do we got here? We got confidentiality.
Let's touch on that real quick. Just the CISSP example. So a CISSP is an isolated location, right? So really nothing in, nothing out except the people working there. So they have to go in. The data in that network could potentially be air gapped or isolated as well. So that's a great example, Tony. Thank you so much. But yeah,
Now, have you ever gone to an environment like that?
I have. It's pretty intense. Have you?
I've gone in an environment. Yeah, I've gone in an environment where you had to like phones, everything, wallet, keys, all were locked in the safe. They scanned you before you go in. And there's guys with guns, like machine guns, go in before you go in. It was pretty intense. I was like, oh my god, like. But yeah, everything was air gap. You couldn't get good through, and like as soon as you got in the air, your cell phone dropped, like all the signal, everything. So there's nothing in, nothing out.
Yep, there will be no commingling of data there.
No.
So Brandon, jump into this example we had for Ancestry.com. Let's talk about severe loss in confidentiality, and then we'll start kicking on to the next leg of the CIA triad.
So yeah, let's talk about that. Like, I mean, one of the things that we look at is, as we see, all of us as IT professionals, security professionals, everyone that's watching, we always see breaches. And we always see these breaches and kind of look at, what's the actual risk to us and the data and then how it relates to confidentiality. I want to use Ancestry.com because it relates personally to us is because it's your family information. You're looking at family tree. You're looking at this information. You're putting your date of birth, your address, your location, your age, and then you're searching out for all these family members. Well, on July 20th, an unsecured server was exposed with sensitive data belonging to 60,000 customers. A family history search software company, and Ancestry.com. The details leaked included email address, geological location data, IP addresses, system users' IDs, support message, and technical data. Right. So when you look at all that information, and that's just what they told us. A lot of times there's actually more that's going on in the back end that we're not aware of, but that's at least what they found out. So imagine all that, your PII information, all that you thought was confidential, your family history, everything that's going on was all leaked.
Yeah, it's unreal. And so I have another example here in a minute that I want to jump onto that, but I did want to address one more question. So what is the CISSP app I recommended? The app I recommended was CISSP Prep. And it's a free app, no ads blasting you, but it's all the questions you could ever imagine for this exam. Also, Paul MacGyver, thanks for joining us. I'm glad we have a CISSP here to keep us honest. I am seeing your chat. I was actually trying to respond to you guys, but the platform I'm on wasn't sending the chat back, so I apologize there. So real quick, back to confidentiality. So yes, they leaked credentials. They leaked all their personal information, right? Family members, all kinds of stuff from Ancestry. Well, check this one out. There was another data breach by a company called GED Match. Now, this company allows you to upload DNA and genome data. Mm-hmm. Imagine if that got hacked and the confidentiality of that information was leaked. Now, it's not just one person's genetic information, because you have to realize, Brandon, okay, you have kids and they have some of your genetic makeup. So it can affect other family members as well, even if they didn't upload their DNA or genome information. So, and once again, I always bring it back, Brandon, like it may not be like, I take Facebook or the TikToks, for example, right? Some people don't even care that TikTok's stealing all of your data. I keep telling people, guys, it's not about what they're doing with the data today. It's what are they going to do with the data 5, 10, 15 years from now? And that's key.
Well, let's talk about confidentiality. So now let's all put our manager hats, our director's hats, high level executive. So you're going through this right now. You're trying to plan out, I'm Ancestry.com, you're Genome, you're a company right now. You're looking at confidentiality. When this situation happens and you got breached, how are you supposed to recover? What are you supposed to do to look at restoring confidentiality? First is actually the technology, right? Mm-hmm. You got to do your breach response. You do the technology. You look at remediation. The next is now you have to do PR, right? Now you have to reestablish the confidentiality with your customers to let them know that you've done all the steps and all the measures to increase your confidentiality and your security, right? To restore the brand recognition, all that. So when people think of confidentiality, you think a lot about systems. You think about encryption. You think about endpoints. You think about firewalls. You think about security on that side. But we don't think a lot of times about confidentiality is your customers. Your customers now don't trust you when there's a breach, but now you have to regain that trust. So again, at a managerial level, you have to look at all these areas. And as you're doing it, you have to have, forecasting for each, and you have to budget out. So really kind of thinking that mindset, not just the technology, so you put your security hat on. Okay, what technology we do, what kind of breach response with all that. But as a manager, how are we going to forecast and roadmap this whole plan to get us back up and going and reestablish the level of confidentiality and security that our customers now have in us? So just something to think about as you guys are studying this, and get you in that mindset as you're starting to read scenarios and going through the question to really get in that CISSP is that managerial certification.
That's it. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and jump into the next one. We're hitting 7:37 right now, so we're making good time, but we want to keep going. The next leg of that CII triad is integrity, right? So you have confidentiality. Integrity is number 2, and this is seeking to prevent the unauthorized modification of information. So basically, when you refer to somebody as having integrity, what you mean is they're honest, right? They're consistent, they're ethical. But let's take this over to the information security side. Now, there's 2 forms of integrity. There's data integrity and system integrity. Now, if somebody gets into your system and they manipulate something and change something, does that system still have integrity? No, absolutely not, right? So data integrity is seeking to protect information against unauthorized modification of data, whereas system integrity is protecting that system. So on a quick example, let's take, my favorite one in college that I always wish somebody did for me was an unethical student compromised the college grade database and changed not just his failing grades, but everybody else's as well, right? That violated the data integrity. Also, guys, I know I made that joke, but in reality, this exam is really going to harp on ethics. Ethics. You have to put people first. You have to put employees first over profit 100% of the way. So remember data integrity and system integrity, but also you have to have integrity when answer these questions and be ethical as well. And it's going to help you pass this exam. Now,
and just think of that, like you said, the integrity. I mean, going back to that, like even like when you use the ancestry.com or the genome, right? The integrity of the data and everything now has manipulated. We don't know, is our family records complete? Is that going on? So the integrity of the data that we, put up, we laid out for us as users, now we don't know if it's valid. And now we have to go through that. So, and then like you're talking about system integrity, is the system integrity? Like, do they have vulnerabilities? Is there gaps right now? So us as a user, even as a company, now they're going through all this assessment. So things to think about with integrity, just to kind of get that manager hat set on.
Yeah, that's powerful. So once again, the loss of the password and user credentials from data ancestry or the GED match breach, the password and user creds, that was lost in confidentiality. But if the data was changed or manipulated, that would be lost in confidentiality and data integrity. Now, in the GED match breach, they actually, after they did the remediation, they were finding fake people in their database. So that shows that the data was actually compromised as well. Which brings us to the third foundation. Any comments on that, Brandon?
Yeah, Dr. Tony actually made a good comment. This is a scary part of these ransomware attacks. How can you be sure the data you got back was not altered in a harmful way, especially medical data? Yeah. So what's your response to that?
I think this is a great leeway into our third leg stool of the CIA triad is availability, right? So this was actually one of the examples I had is, availability. Everybody thinks DDoS, right? And I'm sorry, I might be jumping into something we had for you to talk about later, but DDoS is going to really hit the availability of an app. It'll bring down your application so nobody can get it. But so does a basic form of ransomware, right? You have a user click a link and it encrypts their system. They no longer have access or availability to that resource. Now, if they don't pay the ransom, that could mean permanent unavailability of that data. But let's talk about more complex forms of ransomware, such as Maze ransomware, right? This is not just somebody, hey, encrypting your stuff, pay me ransom. If you don't, I'll delete it. This is somebody saying, I'm going to get in, I'm going to take all of your data, encrypt what you have. Oh, now if you don't pay me, well, I might modify what you have, right? Dr. Tony, it could be healthcare records, it could be credit card data, it could be genome data. And then potentially, if you continue not to pay me, I could even release this, right? And that's an attack on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those are powerful attacks.
Yeah, and something to add on to that, which is, Joel, you made a great point. That's normally if you can't confirm the data, you should get a forensics team in to actually evaluate the data. right, against backups, against hashing, whatever that may be, to evaluate the data to make sure. Because one of the companies that I know we talked to, they kept restoring from a backup, and they kept getting ransomware over and over again because the actual, malware was actually in the backups, right? And they didn't know how far it went back. So here's where you talk about data integrity, right? And the integrity of the data wasn't assessed. So now they had to go back further to restore the data, right? And to make sure it was clean. Right? Yeah. And this is Sean saying this is why data encryption is so important at the file, network, and database level. Exactly, right? Sean's got a great point.
Yeah, and I think also another point to add on to what you said, test your backups, please. Please test your backups. At least on some schedule, right? Even if it's once a quarter, once every half year, but test your backups just so you know you have something to roll back to. But yeah, so that
goes back to availability. Yeah. Let's bring that back to availability. That goes directly back to availability, because you might be up, 99.9% of the time, but availability also comes down to restoring, right? Making sure your downtime and your risks are lower, right? And your response time is lower. So if there is an incident, you can get the ability back up in an hour versus a day, right? So this is why, like you said, test the backups.
Yeah, and Sean is saying this is provided you have good key management, right? He's bringing it full circle, right? These are all connected because good key management is going to help with your integrity of the data, the confidentiality, and then also availability, right? So it is a triad, and you can't have one without the other. And there was a great example in the book itself that said, if you want confidentiality and integrity, all you have to do is lock up your data in a bin, lock it, and throw away the key. But then you don't have availability, right? So you have to work together. You have to find a balance for what works for your organization.
And let's just quickly talk about the organization, where how at a managerial level, there's this balance that they're always fighting, right? Because the employees want, all access, right? They want everything available at all times, no restrictions. I don't want to have to put multiple passwords in, single sign on, get right in. I want very easy access. The security guys want to lock everything down. They want complete confidentiality, complete data integrity, and now you got this managerial top-down approach. How do you balance out both?
Yeah.
Right? Because you as a CISO and a manager, you have to make sure both are working.
Well, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I know we were supposed to touch on this later, but that goes right into least privilege, right? So, you want to give people as much availability as they need. And this is where least privilege comes in. So I said it a little backwards, because really least privilege says, hey, give them the least amount of privilege they need, but still that means give them the appropriate amount, right? You have to expand their bubble so that A, they can be a productive member of your workforce, and B, they have access to what they need, but C, if they decide to go rogue and do have some malicious actions, they only can influence the segment that they are assigned. And
for sure. And then be careful permission leak, right? Maybe he's in HR, but he's also in IT, and I'm using that as an example, and it's very rare that people are in both groups and act directly. But if they move and they get hired, they're in IT and they move over, and you don't audit your security levels and your permissions, they could have access to both, right? So things like that, right?
Oh, man.
We've seen this in companies.
I'm an offender, right? I've moved companies, and I take the accesses I have, and I still have them, right? And so once again, I would never do that to my organization, but what's to say somebody wouldn't? So when do you audit? What is your audit? Do you go through and audit those once a year even? I would say most organizations probably don't, and it should be something they should. So that's least privilege, right? You have to go through, you have to assign people the least amount of access and availability as you can, but then you also have to go back and audit that occasionally as well. Now, Brandon, this brings us to AAA. Sorry, if you had a comment, jump in.
Well, I know that's actually going to bring it up, right? From what I heard was the 5 A's, and I know some of the books have the AAA, right, where it is, authentication, authorization, accountability. Now, for me, I'm just going to pull up some notes here.
Assurance was the other one.
Yeah, assurance, and there was one more, accounting, I think it was. And it was just the way that you look at the authentication, the authorization, the accountability, and how you look at, controlling the security, right, of all these aspects when you're doing it. So, I mean, with assurance is the process with develop confidence that our security measures are working as intended. So this goes, like you said, through testing. right? Making sure everything's up and going.
Yeah. Now I did edit this, and I'm sorry I did this right before you hopped on. You had the 5As, but I think they're going to be testing on the AAAs. Like, I sat in on part of the CISSP course, and they harped on this AAA, which is why I hacked it up. So I apologize if that's okay. But,
well, it's good to know all 5, right?
True.
But then, if they test on 3, for sure. But it's good to know all 5, just because at the end of the day, you want to make sure. I mean, this is the point of this: is having these deep discussions, so you have as much information. I mean, I look at it as training for a competition. You want to be overtrained and undertrained.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Tony said,
right?
Least privilege can happen a lot, right? The abuse of least privilege when in small and medium companies where folks wear multiple hats. But this is why we're here, right? To interact with you guys. Like when you guys have something we can discuss, let's bring it up. Let's talk about it. Let's dig deep. So it's something you don't forget, right? Because chances are you're going to take the test a couple months from now, and we need to make sure this has a meaningful impact. So let's jump into the AAA real quick. We're sitting at about 748. So AAA, it can be deceiving because it actually starts with identification, which doesn't start with an A. But identification is required before authentication, before authorization, and before accountability can be achieved. So identification is a person has to provide an identity to a system in order to start the AAA process. And here's what I mean. In order to provide an identity, you have to swipe a card, you have to provide a username, you have to wave a badge or speak a phrase, right? Most days, we're just positioning our face in front of our phone, and that's providing our identity. Sometimes a finger on a device. Anyways, that's your identity. So once you provide an identity, then the system can begin to authenticate you.
Right.
Now, so once again, username, that's your identification. And then you pass your password along with your 2-factor text. That's your authentication, right? So username is your identity, password, 2-factor authentication, that's your authentication. Now, once you're authenticated, that's when authorization begins, which is in essence a number of checks to give you the correct amount of least privilege or data back, right? So you're not getting somebody else's account, right? So if I log in with my username password, this is what we do in pen tests. We check account leakage from a basic user to an admin, from an admin to a basic user, and vice versa, because that authorization is a huge part of this.
Right. So you got authentication, authorization, accountability, right? Which accountability is, very extremely important, right? We look at accountability is the process of tracing actions to their source, right? And making sure that we have systems in place to track that, the logins, the authentications, data access, all that. You have this, and a lot of people have SIMs for logging, tons and tons of data and access points, right? So again, making sure you have these in place and they're working properly. False negatives, false positives can't go through, but you're testing it and you're monitoring it and you have a team to do that. And then at a manager level, right, high level, you want to make sure these are working so that if anything happens to the system or the network or the company, you can go back to these logs. You can go back to the data.
That's it, right? You should be able to know that customer only had access to their data, and you should be able to prove it. And that brings you to the 4th A, which is it's back to the 5As, but assurance, right? Assurance is once you have those AAAs in place, assurance is the process you use to develop then confidence in your security measures that they're working as intended. So you should be able to go back before your annual audit and say, okay, prove to me that this is working. Prove to me we have these controls in place. Show me the last pen test report, and that those controls that we had last year that we put in place to ensure that people who are properly authenticated, who are authorized, have the correct availability, we can prove that without a reasonable doubt. You know what I'm saying? Without
a reasonable doubt. Well, it's non-repudiation, which brings us to the next point.
Fantastic.
Right? Where it's actually non-repudiation, which basically means, if you guys haven't heard that term before, is that it ensures that the subject or activity whose cause of the event cannot be denied that the event occurred. So this is where you have the authorization, authentication. So you track that person all the way through the process. You have the accountability, you have the accounting, everything's going through. So now when you go that person to that, you have a track record of everything. So you can't deny it. Like that person did that. Joel logged in at 9:55 a.m. He went to the server, he authenticated, he downloaded that file, there's a whole track, and you can track it all the way through the process. So if anything happened, now you can bring up that report and you can say, look, Joel did this at 9 o'clock, and we can see that he logged in, username and password. And then even I want to add this, like physical security. Now I know the CISSP used to have like a physical security domain, but even when you look at Joel came in the building, he swiped his access card, we saw him through the CCTV cameras, he sat at his desk, like that whole train of events is non-repudiation.
Yeah.
Right? So just something to think about.
Well, and I know for a fact that this pivots into the legal section of this as well with chain of custody, right? You have to be able to track a chain of events. So there is without a doubt, without a doubt, right? So there's no doubt that somebody else could have even possibly tampered with that piece of evidence or that file, etc. Now, a good example for non-repudiation is banks, right? Banks are sticklers. They require multiple checks and balances, and here's what it looks like. If anybody goes to the teller line, right? Let's say, Sean, you go to the teller line, you have to provide your ID, you have to swipe your card, you have to enter your PIN number, the camera is staring right at your face, and you're allowed to wear a mask at a bank now. You used to not be able to do that, but you can now. But then if you come back to them and say, hey, there's $10,000 or whatever amount missing from my account, I didn't do it, they can go back and be like, that's your signature, you entered your PIN number, and that's your pretty face, right? Mask or not, we can tell. That's right. Non-repudiation.
Right, exactly. No, that's a perfect example.
Yeah. So
just see if Dr. Tony now, do you guys have any questions? I know we're coming up to, we got a couple more minutes to 8 o'clock. Let's get some feedback from you guys. What do you guys think of the content so far? Anything that you guys would like us to add? Let's kind of, bring it back to these guys, because you guys are helping us provide great feedback, especially information that you guys are, like Dr. Tony, Sean. Just kind of look in the chat on LinkedIn.
Yeah, Paul, we have Oloysius Zeze. Thank you on YouTube. Appreciate you guys joining. And sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but we appreciate all of you guys.
Yeah. Let us know. Comment on LinkedIn or YouTube, wherever you're watching. Let us know. Again, we're trying to provide as much value to us as it's to you guys, because we're studying this as well. Yeah,
but to be honest with you guys, just by you guys tuning in and listening to us, like, this is a good, once again, 30 some odd pages that you won't have to go read, or when you do read it, you'll be like, okay, yep, I remember this, and you can move through quicker. Now we're going to get through a little bit more time, but I think we're going to leave the legal stuff till next time. We may or may not, I didn't get to talk to Brandon before, have a lawyer, I believe, joining us next week.
We're working on right now getting a lawyer
to really dig into the legalities of it.
Yeah, that'll be next Tuesday. Start time 7 a.m.
7
We'll
p.m.
get the technical issues. 7 p.m. Sorry, 7 p.m.
I won't be up at 7 a.m.
I'm up at 5, but 7 p.m. We'll get that. I'm actually working on a lawyer, so next Tuesday we'll be doing that as well.
Yeah. And so quick question, Dr. Tony said, does non-repudiation include both sides of the transaction? Absolutely, right? So it's checks and balances on both sides. You have to be able to log not just the user logging in and authenticating and grabbing the transaction from that side, but you should also have logs from your file server. You should have checks and balances from your file server. You should ensure that the file server or whatever resource it is only giving a certain amount of access. So you can say without a doubt that user downloaded this file at this time. Quick comment is, she continued on saying, not just the bank can confirm you took the funds out, but you can prove that you input the funds into the bank. Absolutely, right? So that's an interesting one, because at the bank, they actually didn't care who put funds into the bank. Just goes to show you the nature of the bank, right? But I used to actually be a Wells Fargo bank manager in a past life before I got into cybersecurity. But yeah, we actually didn't prove, we started to ask people to put their names on it, on a check. But if somebody comes in and wants to put cash into your account, we don't care. And depending on the system, that may be the case, right? You won't care who put something there, but you want to know who took it out. You want to know who had access to it. So depends on the system, I would say. Any feedback from that, Brandon?
Well, yeah, I actually find the banks here in Canada will have non-repudiation of think data in, data out, right? So data out, like you're talking about user data, you're downloading it, you're moving it from different desktops to flash drives to laptops, whatever they mean, or you're transferring from source to source. doesn't matter that they're tracking that. But when you're looking at from an external source coming in, from data coming in, right? And that could be e-commerce forms, could be different sites. They're all tracking that as well. I mean, if you look at even, I'm just using as simple as e-commerce, they're tracking IP addresses, right? They're tracking location, geolocation, IP addresses, where you come from. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use proxy and spoof it, but they're tracking all that information to make sure, they're trying to be as secure as possible. So you're talking about physical, talking about data and doing an actual deposit. They're actually, again, that's physical, where they're seeing you on a camera.
That's true.
They're seeing you input, an actual access code. Mm-hmm. They're looking at the count you're going to. They're seeing time, date, location, right? They're seeing what you're wearing, estimated size. So all that is non-repudiation, but like, that is that person, right? And they put all those checks and balances to make sure. So if someone does compromise your account, it's all there, right?
Yeah, and Sean made a great example. From an auditing and regulatory standpoint, this is why auditors will flag you for using accounts, shared accounts on computers, or sharing passwords. But it's true, because then you cannot track it, right? And you have to be able to tell who did what. A great point, Sean. Fantastic add to that conversation. We want to hit...
let's go back.
Go ahead. Go ahead. So
let's add that for Sean. A lot of companies where they might have admin rights might share it. Right? They might have a shared account that it's like admin, and I'm just going to use that admin to do installation of software, where secure companies need to have it isolated to the actual tech support, the individual. So what happens is they're installing software they're not supposed to, they're doing things like that they can track them. Right? And I've talked to some companies, smaller companies, where they're like, it doesn't matter. The password is the username is IT, the password is password, right? I'm just using that as an example. Hopefully no one doesn't really use that. But they're doing that just because they have 3 IT guys and they just want them to be able to log in, log out quickly and not change their passwords every 30 days and, have multiple, complex passwords, and they're trying to make it easier for them. So like Sean's saying, you got to make sure those policies are in place as a manager, top-down auditing process. You got to make sure they're in place.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had another question. I know we're wrapping up here, but we had a question. The 4 mandatory canons, is that something we can expect on the exam? Absolutely. So for those of you not familiar quite yet, this is going to come up in the ethics section, or the code of ethics for ISC squared, which is the certification or the certifying body for the CISSP. But basically it's talking about protecting society, the Commonwealth, and infrastructure, acting honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. Absolutely. And I believe at the end, once you get certified, you actually have to sign a piece of paper before or at the end of the exam saying, yes, I will abide by the ISC squared code of ethics. And it's a binding requirement. So yes, it will definitely, you'll have at least a question or two on the exam for that.
Right. And then Sean's just making a comment about LAPS, like local. Sean, correct me if I'm wrong. It's local administrative password solutions. Is that what you're commenting about?
Yeah, and
we'll just wait to
while he does that, I wanted to talk just a couple more points, just so we can say we touched it. Defense in depth, right? We talked about the CIA triad, but let's say one of your security measures fail, right? And if you didn't have defense in depth, or a layered defense approach with overlapping controls, it may have caused a confidentiality breach, right? Something like that. But you can continue to improve your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability through defense in depth.
Right, and that's extremely important.
Yeah.
Now, we did subject versus objects.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to quickly just cover that?
I was going to bring that to the next time, but yeah, we can. So we have a few more points, guys, we want to leave you with today. So when they refer to a subject in the training, a subject is an active entity on a data system. So a subject is active, and I have a really good example that you can never forget here in a moment. But an object on a system is passive data within the system. So here's the example. Objects can range from documents on physical paper to database tables in a text file. But the important thing to remember about objects is that they're passive, okay? They do not manipulate other objects. Let me repeat that. Objects are passive. So think of it like a water bottle sitting on your desk, right? But the example I have is in regards to a computer system. So if you're running Chrome or any other application, it is a subject while it's running in memory. Okay, so a subject is an application, something that can manipulate other objects, but when the browser is not running in memory, your Chrome application, it's an object on the file system. So I hope did I explain that well, Brandon?
Now, let me ask, does anyone have any questions about that? Because I agree with you, right? And with your definition, but an object can be at rest, right? It's not moving, right?
Correct.
Think of it that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, if it's something that is, stagnant, not moving, not accessing any memory, system, solutions, anything like that, people, it's it could be considered an object.
That's it. Now let's talk due care and due diligence real quick, and then we'll wrap up for the day if that's okay, and gross negligence. So these are pretty important. There is a difference between due care and due diligence. So when you're going to secure your enterprise, due care is doing what a reasonable person would do. So if you don't do due care, you could end up in serious legal issues. Now, here's a quick example. Parents have a duty to care for their children, right? So that is due care. Now, due diligence is the management of due care. So here's a good example. Think of due diligence as just a step beyond due care. So expecting your company to keep their systems patched means you expect them to exercise due care. Let me repeat that. If you expect your organization to keep their systems patched, you're expecting them to exercise due care. But when you verify that your organization has patched all their systems, that is due diligence. So due care is saying, yep, a standard person should do that, but verifying it's done, that's when you perform due diligence.
Now, does anyone have any questions for that? Because that's extremely important because, companies can get caught in, they care, but they could be, their due diligence, which becomes a negligence, which we'll talk about later, can be coming at because they're not doing the protocols or systems that they need to do, and they know they need to do. They've actually signed off. They know that they need to do it. This could be from governance, right? They have a governance or compliance they have to meet. This could be from insurance. And then what happens is when they get an auditor comes in and shows that they're not doing it, it can become to negligence.
Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have any questions. I think we did pretty good. Do you want to touch on the negligence portion a little more, and then we're going to wrap up for the day? I think this was a good first session.
Yeah, it's good. So gross negligence is the opposite of due care. It's legally important concept. It's if you suffer from loss of PI but can demonstrate due care in protecting PI, you're legally a stronger group. For example, if you cannot demonstrate due care, you were gross negligence. You are in a most worst legal position. And now this is where it's really important, is when you have negligence, you can be actually legally responsible, right? So that's what something is very important to understand, especially as you're going through the CISSP, and it's your responsibility. And you see this, a lot of CISOs and all that there's a breach, sometimes get fired, right? Because now they go in internally and go, well, did you do the things that you needed to do? No. Well, that was negligent. Like, it wasn't even just you didn't do care. It was negligent because you were told to do this. You were told that we need these systems in place, and now it was your responsibility and you didn't do that. So this is why it's so important to have your managerial hat and look at everything that's, critical that you need to do, kind of mid-level, and then maybe stuff that's over a roadmap over a year. This is why you need to do these activities as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you have due care, which is just what you should be expected to do, right? Due care. Due diligence is when you take it a step above, right? That's CYA. From a CISO perspective, if you're performing CYA just for your own job, you have to do due diligence. You have to run your audits. You have to run the right checks. You have to make sure you have the right visibility into your network and into your infrastructure. And then if you don't do due diligence, and you might even slip below due care, that's when you fall into gross negligence. And that's really the place where you're going to start seeing breaches. You're going to see leaks. You're going to see malicious insiders who are successful in their endeavors, etc. So,
yeah, and the responsibility. I mean, that's key here to think about. When you said ethics, that's when the ethics come in. Mm-hmm. Where did you care, but you were just negligent on the actual, you didn't do your due diligence, you didn't do your research, you didn't talk to the right experts, whatever that may be, and now you're actually responsible. Sean was actually saying the Equifax data breach is a good example, right? And I actually, before we go, what do you think about the Equifax data breach? What's your thoughts on that?
I thought it was a really interesting scenario that they obviously lost confidentiality, right? There was due diligence that wasn't performed, but they took due care. Does that make sense? So they did the minimum required, but it still wasn't enough. They didn't verify that their S3 buckets had the correct security controls, right? They didn't hire the correct employees to ensure that this didn't happen. Now, of course, they had a malicious employee who literally just had malintent and was trying to make a name for themselves. That's my 2 cents on it. But yep, hire a better cloud security team.
But then they should have had due diligence, should have had protocols and audit and like you said, security in layers and defense, right? Defense in depth. They should have had that in place where if something would have happened, they should have alerts. They should have notifications if data was going to get leaked and start to get breached. They should have alerts and been able to at least detect it sooner than they did. Yeah. And then they should have been able to detect, react and then remediate, but they didn't. They're going to respond. So they didn't. So even that for me, and then one thing that for the Equifax from my point of view was then after we had to pay Equifax for, our confidentiality in the sense of getting, I think it was like $49 a month for your credit checks, right, in your background. So now it's kind of like this, this due care wasn't really there for me because that should have been covered. As if I was, got a report from Equifax, or was it TransUnion, one of the two. If I got my credit report and you got compromised, you should be covering at least for the year my identity and my credit. I shouldn't have to pay for it. You got breached, and now I have to pay for the breach. So it's like, I don't know if I like that.
And I don't know about you, but they haven't gained my trust back. I locked up my credit with Equifax, and I don't plan on unlocking it anytime soon. So the more people who do that, the more the more strain it puts on them as a company. So they lost my trust, and they might have lost yours as well. So, well, that is it for today, guys. Thank you guys for joining us so much. Once again, Joel Bork, Brandon Krieger. We will be here Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to jump into the domains. And hopefully next week we'll bring a guest speaker with us to make the legal side of this one a little more exciting and provide real-world examples. Closing thoughts, Brandon? Say goodbye to our audience. Thank you guys again.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, everyone. Sean, there was a Dr. Tony and everyone that was, giving us feedback. It was great. Come out next Tuesday, Joel was saying, at 7 p.m. And if you know anyone that wants to be on the show, wants to provide their insight, as a CISSP professional in the industry, kind of knows what, is going on in certain domains, let us know. We're actually having a lot of guests on the show to be able to talk about specific dates to give you guys more value as you're studying.
Yeah. And also, if you have friends who are looking to get the certification, bring them on board. That's what this is all about. We're here to study with you guys, take this exam with you guys. Let's all pass. Let's raise up the next generation of CISSP professionals. And that's it, folks. Have a great day, everyone. Brandon, thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Joel.
See you guys.